Hi, and thank you for checking out the highlights from our new GNAR Academy course, Planning for Resilient Communities. My name is Elizabeth Soja. I am the program coordinator for the Gateway and Natural Amenity Region Initiative, or the GNAR Initiative. And I'm really excited to share with you some of the highlights from this course we really hope will help communities. If you're not familiar with our program, a little about us. We are a program out of the Institute of Outdoor Recreation and Tourism at Utah State University. It's part of USU Extension, and the Institute is formally recognized by the Utah State Legislature to provide research and technical support to communities, governments, and non-government agencies to plan and manage outdoor recreation and tourism in Utah and beyond. The NAR initiative, my program, we say our mission is to help Western Gateway and NAR communities thrive and preserve the things that make them special. What is a NAR? A NAR is a gateway. So these can be gateways to state or national parks, national forests, recreation areas, protected cultural sites, lakes, rivers, ski resorts, really just prominent public lands. Natural amenities. So these are communities that are really deeply tied to their local natural amenities, their economic development and economy is really closely tied to that landscape. And they're part of a broader region. So these communities don't just exist in isolation. National parks often, have many gateway communities, and what happens in those communities can spill over into the communities beyond them. So those regional ties are also a really big and important part of it. We like to say these are small rural towns that see big city problems. So they often struggle with housing affordability. They see a lot of traffic and parking issues. They struggle with short-term and long-term rentals, whether too many or too few. And we try and do our work through three pillars. So research, we try and do research and study these communities. We provide education to these communities and to university students who want to work with these communities. And capacity building, we try and provide resources, best practices to help strengthen these communities' internal capacity. This course lines up with our education and our capacity building pillars. A little background on the GNAR Academy. Our hope with the GNAR Academy, it was to create low barrier training that is accessible for gateway community leaders. So very affordable, very easy to do asynchronously on your own schedule. And we wanted to cover these planning topics from a small rural gateway specific lens. There are a lot of resources out there that are geared toward urban audiences. There are not as many geared towards small rural gateway community audiences. It's not that we don't feel like urban audiences could benefit from these resources. We hope everyone could, but we have really tailored them to target that demographic because we feel like they need specific, unique help at times. And yeah, the goal is to help these communities become more self-sustaining and resilient to their challenges. Our first one was all about leadership 101. It had a lot about conflict navigation, collaboration. Our second one was about understanding and managing short-term rentals. And this course is about resiliency. A little bit of a background on this course. Why resiliency? Why for our third course? I don't know about you, but I was very taken aback by the Los Angeles fires in 2025. It was very shocking to see not just the scale and the scope and the devastation caused by those fires, but also the location, the speed at which at which it unfolded, and some of the challenges that happened there in a place that you wouldn't really think of as wildfire. At risk for wildfires. It's next to the ocean. It's known for being very temperate. How do you address challenges like that? And it sparked a lot of conversations within the state of Utah as well about how are our communities ready for this and what are they seeing? And we really wanted to help our audience answer those questions as well. We got a grant from the Office of the Property Rights Ombudsman through the state of Utah to pursue and develop this course. And to make this course, we interviewed over 30 community leaders, researchers, wildfire, flooding, and disaster resilience experts. I am not a wildfire or a flooding expert, but there are people out there who are, and we wanted to take their knowledge and put it into the hands of our communities in a way that's easy to understand. We also reviewed over 100 research articles, news articles, studies, community plans, ordinances, and webinars. And we had the course tested by academics and community leaders in the hopes that they could help us hone the content, make sure we're really making it valuable for our target audience, and that everything in there is important and valuable. These are the 7 lessons of the course. We understand that there is a lot in this course. Each of these lessons could be kind of their own online course, and so this is a big undertaking. So this presentation is really going to hit on some of the highlights we feel are most important and most valuable for communities to walk away with. Starting with lesson 1, how did we get here? Understanding development patterns, disaster risk, and land use. So lesson 1 zooms out and takes a 30,000-foot view. Like, what is the difference between a hazard and a disaster? There are natural hazards everywhere, earthquakes, hurricanes, but hazards don't turn into disasters until they impact communities, until there's human suffering on the ground as a result of those hazards. To understand kind of the connection and the link between hazard and how it goes into disaster, a community needs to understand their risk. So a hazard combined with a community's vulnerability to that hazard, that is their risk. If you are along a river and you have homes very close to the river, you are at much higher risk for a flooding disaster. There are also a lot of resources out there to help us understand how our historical building patterns and how we have developed, especially in the West, has kind of contributed to elevated risk for these disasters. So not only along rivers, humans built settlements in the ways and the places that made the most sense to meet their needs. We built along rivers for, commerce, ease of commerce to transfer goods up and down the rivers. We built along forests to help facilitate logging and natural resource extraction to get the things we needed to build our communities. And some of those building patterns have elevated the risk, especially in the Western US, that has a lot of that more natural resource history and heritage tied into our communities. But it's not just historical. There also, if you look at this graph from the American Property Casualty Insurance Association, this is looking at America using Redfin data. Just between 2020 and 2022, the fire risk of America's communities went way up. And this has a lot to do with how much we are building in these high-risk areas still today, even after understanding the risks. So 2 million acres a year are being built in the wildland urban interface, for instance. So these are the areas where homes abut forests and fuel-heavy landscapes. And we do this for a lot of reasons. Partially, this is because they're beautiful places. It's beautiful to live in a forest. It's also cheap often. The WUI is far away from those urban cores that can be the most expensive part of a community. Other tools that we highlight in the course that can help a community understand what they are at risk for is this Neighborhoods at Risk tool from Headwaters Economics. So this is looking at Moab, Utah, and it covers many different risks that a community could face. But if you look at the climate exposure, 100% of Moab's homes are at risk for wildfire. And you wouldn't think of Moab typically as a high fire risk community. However, it is, because there is a lot of fuels and it is a very dry area. Flooding, there's a big chunk of the community that is in that floodplain. But they also look at other indicators like people without health insurance, number of units that are rentals, housing units that are mobile homes. So 15% of the community being a mobile home, that shifts your risk profile as well, because different types of housing are much more vulnerable to destruction, unfortunately. This is a great quote from one of the researchers we interviewed. Don't assume it's never going to happen to you. Put a different way, don't let past occurrences of hazards or lack thereof inform the future. Hazards are changing, where they happen, how severe they are, how frequent they are, and we are going to see places experiencing disasters that have never seen them before. Another thing that came out of our interviews that was a little surprising, and we decided to include in the course given how much it was emphasized, was how does FEMA work? That may seem a little bit aside from resiliency, however, many of our interviewees highlighted a concern that they often heard was from the communities they work with, which is if we have a disaster, FEMA's going to come help us. Like if we have an emergency, FEMA will come help us. And that is just not always the case. So in the course, we talk about who responds to an emergency. How do resources get deployed? How do disasters get declared? When does FEMA come in? And this was really important as one of our interviewees highlighted. The reality of disaster declarations is there are very few rural areas that get disaster declarations because it's often based on infrastructure damage. And rural communities usually don't reach the threshold to get that declaration, so no funds are unlocked. So if FEMA does not come help your community, what are you doing to help rescue yourselves, maybe? Next up is wildfire. This is the biggest lesson in the course. Wildfire is a huge topic, and there's so many resources out there that we did not want to recreate anything, but we also wanted to really thoroughly highlight how communities can wrestle with this challenge. It's such a big challenge. We go all the way back to the basics. So starting with the fire triangle, how does a fire even happen? You have your oxygen, your heat, and your fuel, and all of them catalyze into this combustion and cause a flame. But what does that mean? That's very scientific. Well, the challenge is during a wildfire, homes equal fuel. So homes turn into fuel, and that is a thing that happens with fire that doesn't happen with other disasters. As this one interviewee put it, a flood doesn't flood harder if it washes away a home, but a fire burns harder. A home is just a pine tree on steroids. You have your gasoline in the garage, you have your boat, your RV next door, you have all sorts of combustible things in a home that just escalate it. And one of the challenges with the LA fire, going back to our fire triangle, is the wind. And wind is the oxygen part of this equation. And so if it's abnormally hot, they had 100-mile-per-hour winds, and homes are just, a pine tree on steroids, you can begin to understand why it got so bad so quickly. Another thing we highlight that community leaders should be aware of are commonly held but incorrect beliefs the public can have around wildfire response. All fires are fightable if we try hard enough. That's not true. As LA showed, firefighters will put out all fires. If a fire approaches my home, firefighters will come to protect it. When a fire happens, I will have plenty of time to evacuate. These are not true. This has been highlighted in many communities in the West, how these can be false narratives that people hold. And if a wildfire does come through, it can really cause harm, unfortunately. One other aspect of fire is there are short-term and long-term impacts from fire. This is true of any disaster, but especially with fire because it is happening so frequently. Short-term, we are aware a fire can cause loss of homes, loss of businesses and sales tax, damage to infrastructure, smoke inhalation, and people can unfortunately die. However, the long-term impacts are some of the most painful. So long-term loss of community members. 6 years after the 2018 Camp Fire, Paradise, California is only 1/3 of its pre-fire size. It is a completely different community than the one that was devastated in 2018. Tax space impact. So in Hawaii, 400 residents left Hawaii permanently after those 2023 fires, which led to around $3 million in loss to the state for that income tax that those residents were providing before. Housing price impacts. If you lose a huge, swath of homes, it puts pressure on the homes around it. So there's research after the Camp Fire that regional home prices increased 13% after the Camp Fire. It can decimate the tourism visitation if there's ugly scars on the landscape now. Community members can be traumatized, and that can really carry on for several years. They can have long-term physical health impacts and watershed impacts. A hurricane is neither good nor bad, they just happen. We don't try and stop a hurricane. We try to build communities in ways that they can withstand hurricanes. We need to view fire the same way. I love that quote from one of our interviewees. In the course, we highlight that there are three kind of buckets that actions can come out of for wildfire. There are individual actions, community actions, and actions that have to be taken at a regional or state level. On those community actions, I'm sure many of you have seen this, there are those zones of risk that, NFPA has put out that homeowners and property owners can take action within these zones to help lower their risk of their home being lost. At a community level, a community can pursue getting a wildfire protection plan. So community wildfire protection plans, CWPPs, are some of the most powerful steps a community can take to increase resiliency. In Utah, communities have to have a CWPP to participate in the cooperative wildfire system. And CWPPs are also recognized by FEMA as a hazard plan and can help unlock other resources. One of the biggest things I wanted to highlight that came out was the evacuation vulnerabilities. Evacuation is one of those things. Everybody, if you have stellar, non-overwhelmed emergency management, leaders in your community, they may have a great system in place. But it is wild how many communities have that vulnerability exposed and a lack of evacuation exposed in the middle of a disaster. So one interviewee shared from Marin County, California, people have some crazy ideas about evacuations. They see headlines full of burned out cars and think they're going to die in their cars if they evacuate. They think they should go on bike or on foot. But if I was talking to communities, safe evacuations are 100% possible. If you prepare and have a plan, you won't lose anyone. Stress that. And one leader from Moab said, Moab right now has one exit north and one exit south. So if you're in town and those are broken or even power outages, it's crazy how quickly a community loses its resiliency based on minor interruptions in the system. And so if community leaders can be aware of, if something happened, where do we go? How many people do we need to get through those paths? And if that path is blocked, what is our backup plan? That can be so powerful and important in saving lives. Next up is flooding. We go a little bit into the types and causes of flooding again, a little bit, basic for those who may not be as familiar with the ways floods happen. But linking flooding even back to wildfire, one researcher said, you're not just planning for one wildfire, you're planning for post-fire flooding. Flooding is tightly linked, especially in mountain landscapes, with wildfire. It is a huge risk after a wildfire, especially if it was a full burn wildfire along a slope. It can sterilize the topsoil depending on how hot the fire was and make it hydrophobic, so water just glides straight off of it. It can cause massive landslides based on how the soil composition has changed, and really being aware of okay, if a fire does happen, what is the risk that comes after that? Unfortunately, there are these cascading hazards sometimes that can happen after an event. We discuss a little bit about the National Flood Insurance Program and rate maps, how to understand them. A lot of communities participate in the National Flood Insurance Program, but some of these maps haven't been updated since the 70s or 80s. And so encouraging leaders, if you do know that you do participate in NFIP, when was your map last updated? What does your map show? How is that map being incorporated into approvals and into the planning decisions that are being made? Because sometimes things, as we move so quickly through life and other things are coming onto leaders' radars, things can get lost along the way, and we may not be fully calculating future risk into our current decisions. We talk about some of the plans that you can incorporate flood resiliency into. Obviously there are things like hazard mitigation plans or a stormwater master plan. But there are also really innovative things happening, like in your recreation and open space plans. And you can actually build a lot of green infrastructure that can help mitigate flood damage into new recreational resources, new parks, new trails. It's a really valuable thing if you're doing that work anyways, to think about how can we kill multiple birds with a stone there, and address multiple challenges our community is having. Emergency response plans. So going back to evacuation and fire, a fire evacuation may look very different from a flooding evacuation, depending on where your roads are and what's happening. Uh, is your community ready for that? Do they have those kind of distinctions in mind? Next up, understanding insurance and affordable housing and housing affordability. This one might be a little bit of a surprise that it is in a resiliency lesson. However, insurance is a huge, huge driver of action in the resiliency space right now because it is something that is starting to really hit home for many community members, especially in gateway communities. This is a funny bumper sticker that my husband actually saw on the interstate. This is a photo from Etsy, but like saw this, but it speaks to a larger truth that we maybe are uncomfortable to acknowledge. Because I know before I made this lesson, I actually didn't really understand how insurance works. I knew I had to have it. I knew it would help me if something bad happened. But this lesson really, we hope, gives community leaders a way to talk about insurance to community members in a way that they can understand. A common thing that's heard as rates are increasing across the West are insurance companies are being greedy. They are, they're prioritizing profits over people. They just want to make more money. And insurance is pooled risk. So we all pay into a fund, but insurance does not reduce our risk. So we all pay into a fund, and if something bad happens to this person over here, they can pull money out of this pool and they will be made whole again. They can recover from that bad thing that happened to them. But if something bad happens to everyone in the pool at the same time, that causes a really big problem and the pool dries up. And this is what we are seeing. So this is some data from the American Property Casualty Insurance Association. It is, 2021, 2022, 2023, this was from a presentation they gave to Coconino County, Arizona. So it's looking at Arizona numbers here, but they ran a deficit. Their members ran deficits in those years because the wildfires and the disasters took more out of the pot than was paid into it. This is highlighted in this quote from the president of APCIA from a video on YouTube. Over the last decade, for every dollar of homeowners insurance premium that we've taken in as an industry, we've paid out $1.17 in claims. That is simply not sustainable. So it isn't so much about property, insurance companies just want to make money. They're getting greedy. At this point, it is a matter of solvency. And I think that is something that an everyday person doesn't understand. These are happening at such a large macro scale. This is also highlighted in, this statistic from State Farm. So by law, insurance companies are required to carry a certain amount of surplus. So if a really bad thing happens that takes more than they have 1 year, they'll have an extra pot that they can pull from to pay out from that. Well, in 2016, that pot had $4 billion for State Farm. And in 2023, it had gone down to less than $2 billion. And there are multiple reasons for this. It's not just that there are more disasters happening. It's also that, rebuilding homes has gotten much more expensive, especially since the pandemic. Price of materials is more expensive. Labor is more expensive. And this is something that the insurance industry is having to reckon with rapidly in real time to decide how they can survive what's going on now. This quote from a professor at UC Berkeley really highlights that some people have likened the insurance industry to the canary in the coal mine for the climate crisis, and the canary is just about dead. So one thing that can be really challenging for community members when their rates do go up is they don't understand why. Like, how is the company even making this decision? Why nothing has happened in this area for the last 40 years, let's say, and all of a sudden my insurance just doubled in 1 year. We talk about in the lesson a little bit about how insurance companies think about these models. They have these proprietary models. They are black boxes. Each company has their own model, which is why one company will give you a different rate than a different company. But some of the things they are looking at are, the age of the home, the local crime rates, the local ISO rating. How close are you to the fire station if something happened? What is your disaster risk? And these are some catastrophe models, CAT models, that insurance companies are starting to run now. distance to the fire station and water. Are you on a wind-aligned road? What is your access and egress happening? What is your defensible space? I mean, they in this presentation, he talks a little bit about how they can look at satellite imagery, they look at county records. They are pulling in all sorts of data when they are deciding these insurance ratings. That is not really common knowledge for a lot of people. And this has been highlighted in states in recent years, as more and more have been passing mandatory WUI codes. Well, that WUI boundary, you put me in this WUI, my insurance is going to go up. And people get really scared and worried about insurance going up because the state showed them in this WUI boundary. But that is not tied to the insurance rate. Insurance companies are running their own models. So whether the state or some wildfire risk map shows your home in a boundary or not, they already know that. They knew that before the state designated that, unfortunately. But that is, again, a talking point that's getting lost in these really high passion, high emotion discussions. Finally, we wanted to highlight that recreation counties, so this is some research again from Headwaters Economics. Recreation counties, these are communities that have gateway communities in them, GNAR communities in them. They are at higher risk of these natural hazards. And this is because they are near those beautiful forests. They are near those beautiful lakes and rivers. It is an important part of their economy and their identity, but that does put them at higher risk, almost double the risk of non-recreation dependent communities. How does insurance play into housing affordability? Well, so homeowner insurance historically has been a little bit over 6% of your total mortgage. It's wrapped into that escrow thing that all of us had to do when we got our mortgages. It's a little bit, we're told when it goes up, but it's a small part of that. A lot of home ownership is the mortgage, your utility, your property taxes. This is going to go up. It's important to note that insurance costs are on a delayed timeline from large events. So all impacts from the Los Angeles fires haven't trickled through the market yet. This is just an estimate from the Insurance Research Council. And this actually doesn't even account for the LA fire. This only goes to 2024. That happened in 2025. This is basing off of previous wildfires that had been happening. And this is alarming. So over the next few years, everyone, even those not near a WUI or anything, might see our insurance rates go up as the industry is trying to reckon with these consequences. So all of that to say, there's a lot of stuff happening. What can communities do to help their members? In the course, we highlight 5 steps that could help a community start to reckon with these challenges. I'm only going to highlight a couple of them. So educating. Most communities don't want to think about pre-disaster planning. It's like preventative work around our personal health. People don't want to talk about prevention. That's the main challenge we have to overcome, helping people have conversations they don't want to have. Helping your community members have conversations they don't want to have. Why is this happening? What are the factors contributing to it? What can we do about it? The what can we do about that really goes into the 5th point, which is support. Communities can opt into programs or encourage their community members to participate in programs like the Wildfire Prepared Home Program. So this is a program out of the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. They're a research firm that helps insurance companies understand what makes a home more robust, more secure, a better investment for us, and what makes them less robust. So if you've seen the videos of like 2 homes side by side and one is on fire and one isn't, and they're blowing embers at it, that's IBHS. They are the ones who do that research on the different materials. How do you build? And Wildfire Prepared Home is one of their biggest initiatives yet to take science-backed steps that community members and property owners can take to increase their personal resiliency and market it. And if you can get the certification, insurance companies have said, we know if the home has this certification, it is a safer investment for us. We are much more likely to protect that home because it's a good call for us. Next up, governance and collaboration. Collaboration, especially for low resource communities, is so important. And this quote really highlights that areas that have put together multi-partner collaborations are successful when a fire comes their way. The wildfire doesn't give a flying flip who owns the land. Collaboration is the name of the game if communities want any chance of reducing risk. It really is true because, if a fire starts on the forest, that's going to impact the community. If a fire starts in the community, that's going to impact the forest. And who you bring to the discussion table around, like, okay, we want to increase our resiliency. How do we do that? How can we approach that? Who's at the table is going to shape the conversation. Um, CWPPs have requirements in law of who must be at the table, but you can expand beyond that. This is a resource from Washington Resource Conservation and Development Council, and they just have a huge list of like who could be involved during your discussion. And some of them might surprise you. The HOA, you may not think about bringing the HOA to your, like, okay, we want to become a more resilient community. Let's invite the local HOA owners. But the HOAs actually have a huge amount of sway in these conversations. In Park City and Summit County, the HOAs are driving a lot of the resiliency action that's being taken within their communities, because they have more autonomy and can make things happen more quickly sometimes than a government can. And so they can be really valuable people to invite, local churches, local community action councils, food bank programs. Who's going to help you respond to the disaster? If something bad happens and you have to recover, who needs to be there? And having them in the room while you're talking about things like how do we refine our evacuation corridor, that can be so helpful. They can point out things you might miss and like, hey, if you implement this part, it'll make it easier for us to get food on the ground quicker. And things like that, just really helping you see through those gaps you might be missing. Tools to improve outcomes. This is a great quote from Summit County. Sometimes the challenge with collaborations is it takes longer to start and we need action now. The best time to start was 30 years ago. The next best time is now. Tools to improve outcomes, aligning the data. Is everyone using the same data? Aligning the projects. Can we make resources go further by sharing projects? And Summit County is a great example of this actually, because, there's the county, there's Park City, there's different municipalities, there's some NGOs in the community, there's the HOAs, and everyone's going after these pockets of money to help address, resiliency. But they actually started coordinating everyone, and it allowed them to go out, instead of going after, $100,000 grants here and there, they could go after these really big, like $2 million cross-boundary projects. They can hire one fuel crew to do a whole bunch of work instead of each hiring their own fuel crew. And it really helps those really tight resources, especially in gateway communities that are more, cash strapped. They have much lower capacity. It can help that go farther. And finally, again, hitting that evacuation point, coordinating emergency response. Do we know how to talk to each other during a crisis? It was shocking to me when I interviewed, some communities in Colorado, how they mentioned they had a fire coming down the mountain, and it took them several hours to get the communities, the city's walkie-talkies talking to the county's walkie-talkies, talking to the Forest Service's walkie-talkies, and making sure they were even all on the same frequency to talk to each other in this response. If you have all those things ironed out ahead of time, those hours can be put to much more valuable activities like helping community members get out of harm's way. Second to last, lesson 6, resilient land use policy. This is the really nuts and bolts lesson, nitty gritty, code and zoning. What policies can you implement? It also highlights that there are some challenges to implementing policy. There's a collective action challenge. The problem is disasters aren't anyone's fault. I mean, if there's a guy who, sparked it with his chain, it's kind of his fault. But if a lightning strike happens, you can't sue a lightning strike. You can't sue the storm. And if that then proceeds to burn down a chunk of your community, what do you do? But it's hard because they aren't anyone's fault. It makes it really hard to know whose job it is to help prepare for that. And people are super busy. It's like, well, I kind of know that we have some risk, but I also have a housing affordability challenge. I have, I have a traffic issue. We have an overflowing parking lot. We have tourists who are upset about, some of our infrastructure challenges we're having. But disasters are one of those things that need to be thought about now before the rain hits the ground, before there's fire on the ridgeline, because at that point it's too late. Like whatever you have done has happened. Um, there's the grandfather challenge, especially in gateway communities. These are older communities that really built out. How do you help it put new best practices onto old buildings? It can be expensive. And the education challenge. Community members just don't understand the risk they are facing. There are a lot of tools out there to help community members and leaders start thinking about this and having these conversations. So again, Headwaters, great resource. Their Firetopia toolbox is awesome. At talking about these different pieces that community leaders can look at and lean into to increase their wildfire resiliency. For communities that have the financial capacity, looking at crosswalking plans to increase resilience. So crosswalking is trying to do multiple plans at the same time. And it can be very expensive, trying to do your community wildfire protection plan with your general plan or your comprehensive plan, with your active transportation plan, with your open space plan. It's a lot of plans to get going at the same time, but it can really help because one, you're making sure all of those plans are using the exact same data. They're using the same existing conditions, they're using the same data. Straight out the door, as soon as those plans are implemented, they are referencing each other and helping implement each other out the door. Whereas when they're done apart and staggered, there can be inconsistencies and it'd be less efficient. And sometimes you can get community burnout as well. If you do 4 plans at the same time and you say, hey, you know what, this is our big planning process for the next 5 years. This is the only time we're going to ask you to take a survey, guys, you might get a lot more traction. So one example we share in the lesson is Jefferson County. They did 4 plans at the same time to help increase that implementation efficiency. So regulating for resilience, the different types of regulations, you can do zoning, you can do site plan regulations, you can even pass individual property policies, building codes for resilience. This is a graphic that kind of shows like the different parts of a home that you can edit and harden to increase your wildfire resiliency. One great example of this on the ground is actually this is the Miracle House or the Red Roof House in Lahaina. And you can see this is not a photoshopped image. This is actually all gray and this is green. This home survived because of the way the home was built. It was actually a historic home that had a lot of termite damage. And so when the new homeowners rebuilt it, they rebuilt it to be termite resistant, which just happened to also be very fire resistant. And you can really see just starkly on display, like, wow, can this make a difference? Yeah, just these sorts of practices can make a difference on whether your home survives or not. And finally, lesson 7, moving forward with confidence. This Tahoe leader says it really well. One thing I would leave people with is have patience. Don't get discouraged in your efforts as a community leader or member. Things don't go fast. Community cultural shifts take a while. It takes years sometimes. So similar to the insurance lesson, we outlined 6 steps that community leaders can take to really move forward with confidence and start building resiliency, even in small ways. For time, I'm only going to hit a couple of them again, starting with the communication piece of it. So having a near miss event, having a fire event really does change the heart of folks. I think this really gets to some of the research. So there's something called the post-event policy window, and it's about 12 to 24 months long. And this is the window where if a community suffers a near miss event, like the fire came right down to the border of the city but didn't come in, that is such a powerful time to have these discussions. And if you can be ready for it, it's really powerful because people understand, they've seen the risk, they've seen the flames, they know that there's risk. It's not something happening in California or Colorado or far away. It's something that can happen here to us. And there's a lot of research that shows that can change hearts and minds and help make policy easier to pass. Another thing community leaders can do once they start doing this and start making materials is try to make it look like your community. So I love this example. This is from Rim to Rim Restoration out of Moab. These are some flood prevention materials that they created, but it doesn't look like, flooding on the Mississippi or flooding up in Park City. This is flooding happening in Moab. There's Red Rock. You know where this is. And that can really help make the materials land closer to home. Another thing you can do is make it fun. So this is a Valentine's Day campaign out of Nevada County, California called Hearts on Fire. And I just love some of these, love that last prepares, even when no one's watching. You're wildfire ready, hot. You keep it trimmed, respect. Maintenance is our thing. Your Valentine always. And some of these are very tongue in cheek, a little bit risque, but that makes it more approachable. It makes it easier to have these sometimes hard conversations. Next thing I wanted to highlight was ACT. One thing that has to happen, and we highlighted this in our short-term rental course as well, is enforcement. Like if you make policies, you have to be ready to enforce them. And this can be challenging, especially for communities that have no capacity. So we have this enforcement ladder going from easiest to implement up to the most challenging. Starting with education, you can just run a webinar here and there and let people know, like, hey, we are doing this. This is the thing. These are the new requirements, and you can just educate them. If people aren't compliant, you can send warnings and notices. Takes more effort because you have to be able to go and look and see who's not compliant. More challenging is implementing some penalties, so fines, maybe doing warnings and then fines and then more fines. And then the most challenging is an ongoing inspection program. So like Boulder County, Colorado has ongoing inspections for their homes. But that's going to take, a lot of resources. You have to go out every year, look at all the properties in your entire jurisdiction. But it is also very effective. Finally, sustaining. And this is where we take these 6 steps and we turn it into a cycle, because this is really what resiliency has to become for communities to be effective. Is this researcher said it well. Don't think of resiliency as a checklist, yet as a circle, always evolving. Conditions change, people change. I know it's hard to be like, the work is never done when we all want a checklist, but celebrate every success along the way, because there is success along the way. So that is the course. That is all of those are some of the really big highlights we really want community leaders to walk away with. There are other benefits. So some of the nitty gritty, the course does cost $80, but if you do work for a Utah community, it is $40 if you use the code Utah50. This cost is just to help us maintain the infrastructure to host it online, have all of that, some of the background costs associated with development. But when you complete the course, you will receive a certificate from USU Extension. You can get a digital badge for your LinkedIn profile. We do periodic facilitated peer-to-peer learning and networking with other members from this GNAR Academy course and other ones. And for AICP members, it does offer 7 credits of CM. So if you'd like to sign up for the course, you can go to extension.usu.edu/NAR/NAR-Academy-resiliency. I know that's a mouthful. I will also put it in the YouTube description, so you guys can just click that and make it easier. But even if you choose not to take the course, I really hope these takeaways help you know some of the things that are really valuable and could make a difference in your community. Easy steps to just get conversations started around this topic, because it's so important and it can really help these communities that we all love and care about thrive and be ready for what comes next. So with that, thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you have a great day. Take care.